All right, so there's a lot going on, and I want to just keep on top of what's happening. All right, so some new numbers came out of Jamaica this week, and they're not great. Unemployment rose to 3.7%, and that's up from 3.3%, while employment fell by 25,700 people. And the economy actually shrank. Real GDP contracted by 4.1% year on year. All right, so we have fewer people working with an economy that is shrinking at the same time. So let's go through it and see what's happening. Here's what jumps out first. The labor force fell by 20,500 people. And to be clear, that's different from unemployment. And it basically means more people gave up looking for work entirely. And that is something that is one of the more quieter aspects of the report, but it's more concerning. Women took the brunt of the job losses because female employment fell by 17,000 versus 8,500 for men. And youth employment jumped to 11.7%, with young women at 14%. The biggest sector losses from the economy were in agriculture, real estate, and the retail trade. Though it's worth noting that Statin flagged that parts of the survey in western parishes were still affected by Hurricane Melissa's disruption. So what they're saying is that not all of the decline is necessarily a fresh slowdown and are as a result of the impact from Hurricane Melissa. On the GDP side, goods producing industries got hit the hardest as it went down by 7.3%. Mining went down by 23.5% and agriculture slowed down by 18.3%. Manufacturing and financial services could be considered bright spots, with both growing. All right, so what's the Bank of Jamaica doing about all of this bad news? Here's where it gets interesting. Their hands are more tied than you'd probably think. At their June meeting this year, the BOJ decided to hold its policy rate at 5.5%. And so you'd ask yourself, why hold on to the rate instead of cutting it if growth is as weak as these numbers are showing? And it's kind of simple response that they would give you. They'd say, because inflation is the other half of the story. Headline inflation hit 5.5% in May, and that worked out to be the fourth straight month that it actually went up. And it's nearing what the BOJ has as their target range, between 4 to 6%. Now, normally, when growth slows down like this, it calls for lower interest rates. But rising inflation calls for the opposite. And right now in Jamaica, we're seeing both at the same time. Now, that combination, and again, you can call it stagnant growth plus rising prices, is what economists call stagflation. And it's one of the hardest situations for any central bank to manage, because whichever way you choose to move rates, you help one problem and worsen the other one. So is the BOJ's hold steady and wait approach the safe move? This is genuinely a contested point, even among economists. So I'm going to try and give some insight into both sides, and you can make up your mind for yourself which way you think is the best way to go. So in the case of holding the interest rate where it is, BOJ says no, this inflation is being driven by an external shock. And that external shock is the Middle East conflict, and that's pushing up energy and commodity prices. It's not by an overheating domestic economy. So cutting rates right now wouldn't bring down the price of imported oil, but it could weaken the Jamaican dollar and add more demand on top of already rising prices, arguably fighting the wrong fire and making imports even more expensive in the process. The case against holding the interest rates. A strict inflation-only focus means that the bank isn't responding at all to the jobs and growth side, the rising unemployment, the shrinking labor force, and the falling GDP. Keeping borrowing costs higher while agriculture and mining are already shrinking makes it harder for exactly the businesses that would need to invest and rehire. Holding isn't neutral. It's a choice to prioritize price stability over near-term jobs, and the choice has a real cost. So the BOJ's own language gives us a clue to which risk worries them more. They've said that they're prepared to act if the conflict becomes protracted. And this should tell you that they're betting the conflict is temporary. If the bet works out to be true, holding the rate steady looks like patience. But if the shock drags on longer than expected, it starts looking less like caution and more like a policy that let a jobs problem get worse while waiting out an inflation problem that will never fully be resolved. Now, I'm not going to pretend that there's a risk-free option. Reasonable people, including economists at the bank itself, could pick any one of the two options, and each one has its own set of risks, and each one has its own set of opportunities. You just have to decide which one is not as bad as the other. So, in closing, this is how I would put it together. Jamaica isn't dealing with a simple recession story or a simple inflation story. It's dealing with both at the same time. And this is genuinely one of the hardest positions for policymakers to find themselves in. Now, underneath the macro numbers, real people are feeling this, especially young women who are facing an unemployment rate over 11% while prices keep climbing. Now, that's not a talking point. That's what these numbers are really saying. Well, that's how I see it. I'd like to hear your take on it. If you're in Jamaica, if this is showing up in your daily life, let me know. And that's what's going on for now. I'll catch you on the next one.